Hello YouTube. Let me start by describing the events leading up to my making this video. Steve Shives is a YouTube personality and feminist who tends to get a lot of negative attention from anti-feminist content creators, much of which may not feature the best arguments ever heard, but at least fall into general norms of criticism or parody. This past Friday, however, something happened which went just too far. An anti-feminist named Bering used a false account, Tristan Love, to ask Steve a question on his weekly show, You Had to Ask. Tristan claimed to be a trans woman who, as a fan of certain anti-feminist content creators, attended a gathering where other fans of this creator assaulted her verbally, physically, and sexually. She described suffering from PTSD due to the attack and asked Steve his thoughts about this, and about whether the rhetoric of the anti-feminist content creator could have encouraged the attack in his opinion. Steve responded with compassion and anger at the terrible crime that was described to him. After this, Bering put up a video where he declared himself victorious for having trolled Steve so hard. Trying to even describe all the ways this is despicable is difficult to do, but let me first begin by talking about crimes against trans people. According to the Office for Victims of Crime, which operates in Washington, D.C. under the U.S. Department of Justice, statistics documenting transgender people's experience of sexual violence indicate shockingly high levels of sexual abuse and assault. 1 in 2 transgender individuals are sexually abused or assaulted at some point in their lives. Some reports estimate that transgender survivors may experience rates of sexual assault up to 66%, often coupled with physical assaults or abuse. This indicates that the majority of transgender individuals are living with the aftermath of trauma and the fear of possible repeat victimization. Hate crimes. Sexual assault perpetrated against transgender individuals may be a component of an anti-transgender hate crime or may be linked to other demographic variables such as race. According to the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs, an act of hate violence such as harassment, stalking, vandalism, and physical and sexual assault are often supported by more socially sanctioned expressions of transphobia, biphobia, and homophobia, and are intended to send a message to LGBTQ communities. Many LGBTQ people also face substantial bias because they belong to other traditionally marginalized groups along other axes of identity, such as race, class, incarceration history, immigration status, or ability. Membership in more than one traditionally marginalized community can increase targeting for severe violence. In the NCAVP 2009 report on hate violence, 50% of people who died in violent hate crimes against lesbian, bisexual, gay, transgender, and queer people were transgender women, and the other half were male, many of whom were gender nonconforming. Sexual assault and or genital mutilation before or after the murders was a frequent occurrence. In 2009, 17% of all reported violent hate crimes against LGBTQ people were directed against those who identified themselves as transgender, with most, 11% of all hate crimes, identifying as transgender women. The remainder identified as transgender men, genderqueer, gender questioning, or intersex. Hate crimes are more prevalent against people of color. In 2009, 53% of LGBTQ hate crime victims were people of color. Of the 22 anti-LGBTQ hate crime murders documented by the NCAVP that year, 79% of the victims were people of color. As noted above, 50%, 11 individuals of the 2009 murders tracked were transgender women. Of those, 9% were people of color, 82%. Of the other 11 murders of gender nonconforming people, 5 or 45% were people of color. I should point out here that experts believe that many more people are targeted for hate crimes than is ever reported to the FBI in particular, because that is a voluntary reporting, and many of these crimes are not labeled as hate crimes. For more recent statistics, the Human Rights Campaign have tracked at least 21 fatal acts of violence against trans people in 2015, the highest number they have recorded. Many of these murders remain unsolved. What Bering has done has minimized these terrible crimes, treated them as an absurd joke, As the sort of person that talks about false rape and assault accusations, he is committing one here for apparently the lulz. As the Department of Justice might say, he has supported the violence and the hate through demeaning it in this manner and trying to bring doubt to people who otherwise would reach out to help victims who come forward. Studies show the symptoms of PTSD, which may include self-harm, suicidal ideation, and eating disorders, among many other serious issues, can be increased when victims receive negative social interactions, such as disbelief, making this particularly cruel. It would be a ridiculous thing for an untrained person to expect to whip out their junior skeptic kit and be able to evaluate a victim's story, given that assault and PTSD survivors often have jumbled, confused, and fragmented memories of events, which experts say may be due to the stress hormones affecting the prefrontal cortex. But for any trans person who sees someone mocked for loving chicks with dicks, just for responding compassionately to a declared victim, whether you believe it was intentional or not, a message has surely been sent. In the past, I have interacted with Bering as a political adversary. It has not been a friendly relationship, to say the least, but we have had our back and forths, however awkwardly, with one another, and up until today, I had not planned to do otherwise. I can no longer do this. Bering is clearly a liar and a fraud, but now we can add all-around disgusting excuse for a human being. I cannot normalize his behavior, which seeks to minimize the hate crimes and assaults suffered by trans people and could make them less likely to seek or receive help for trauma. Bering can do whatever he wants. I want no harm or harassment to come to him. I'm not asking anyone to do anything on my behalf. But for me, from this day forward, I will not discuss or acknowledge Bering in any way. He no longer exists to me. This is not negotiable. Other people can do as they like, but I will not respond to people arguing against this position. As a person who stands with victims of assault, abuse, harassment, and violence, who stands against hate crimes, I can do nothing else. I do hope that other people, including those who would call themselves skeptics, would be willing to criticize one of their own, but I am not holding my breath. Anyone who has been victimized by Bering or his fans in any way, be it harassment, abuse, may certainly come to me, and I will provide any help or support I can. I'm not going to let a grown man abusing the normal trust and empathy we show our fellow human beings as something to be mocked to dissuade me from helping those who need it, and I hope no one else does as well. For the first time since coming onto YouTube, I will not be leaving the comments or the like to dislike buttons open because this matter is not open. It is closed. I am aware that this may cause people to degrade other videos. Go for it. Please be informed that you'll be ignored, and that, to be frank, I couldn't possibly care less. See you in the next video.